Good morning, First Congregational Church of Winchester. How we miss all of you. Like many of you, I've been trying to take a deep dive into racial issues since the murder of George Floyd. Here at church, our adult faith exploration and outreach ministries have teamed up to compile resources, host a Zoom discussion, plan a summer FCCW Reads activity. The book is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And plan follow-up small group discussions for the fall. I have so much to learn. Society has so much to learn. I hope we can learn it this time. The resource list we created is overwhelming. It includes books, articles, podcasts, TED Talks, documentaries, movies, events, workbooks, classes, webinars, poetry, visual art, music, and TV series. And it goes on for 12 pages. It's long and it feels heavy. But 250 years of slavery and 90 years of Jim Crow laws and 60 years of separate but equal policies and 35 years of racist housing policy feels long and heavy too. Instead of seeing the list as overwhelming, maybe I can decide to see it as a gift. My personal opportunity to finally learn what I should have been learning all along. Lately, I've been trying to decide what I am. Am I a diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, supporter? Do I advocate for fairness and justice? Do I truly care? Am I an ally? Do I recognize that I walk around with white privilege? Do I understand that I look at the world through my own preconditioned lens? Am I blessed? Or am I opportunity hoarding? The answer to all of that is yes. Am I a non-racist? Now I know there's no such thing. Am I an anti-racist? No, not yet. At the Network for Social Justice community conversation last week, the leaders there defined anti-racism as the active process of seeing and being in the world with the intention of working to identify, challenge, and change the values, structures, and behaviors that perpetuate structural racism. Okay, so maybe I can decide to see my role not just as being supportive and caring and advocating for inclusion and fairness. I feel like I tried to do all of that. But begin to see my role as 1, learning, and 2, turning my learning and values into action. If I'm not taking action, I'm not helping. It's not good enough to be a good person anymore, as Debbie Irving, who wrote Waking Up White, discusses. We're all good people. It's not about being good or bad. It's about what we decide to see and do. It's about whether we are helping to break the patterns of injustice. When I look at our beautiful, serene, and leafy green town with its quintessential white congregational church on a hill, and I notice that not many Black people live here, do I wonder in a passing kind of way why Black families don't want to live here? Or do I decide to see that years of zoning and housing policy in our town and others across the country have served to segregate and oppress Black families for decades? I can decide to think inactively or actively, just like I can think of myself as not racist or decide to try to become anti-racist. We were so undertaught about racism in school. I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't even know about Black Wall Street or what happened in Tulsa in 1921 until I read about the outcry in reaction to the president's planned rally on Juneteenth there. I barely knew what Juneteenth was. How is this possible? I do know that I was horrified in my youth reading about the Middle Passage and watching the series Roots. And I remember thinking that I didn't want to know much more about this history because it was so upsetting and unfathomable to me. Now, instead of deciding to see this history, although the word history feels fully inadequate to me as a way of describing the atrocities that took place and that continue to take place, but still, can I decide to see this history not just as upsetting and unfathomable, but recognize it as the process that brought about systemic inequality and invalidation for Black people? If I see it in that way, then I might be able to put aside my visceral feelings and have the courage to really look at it, the history, to understand it, and then to add my actions to those of anti-racists around the world. Ibram X. Kendi says that the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession. Here's where God comes in for me. Psalm 139 that Andy read says that God knows me, my thoughts, my heart, and all my ways. God, I am so ashamed. I confess to you that I have not acknowledged the deep trauma of racism as experienced by Black people. I have not fought against racial inequities. I have engaged in ignorance and denial. God, I am complicit in perpetuating systemic racism. Psalm 139 also says that God will test me, see my wicked ways, and lead me. Maybe I can decide to see God's described role, not just as today's required reading, the July 19th lectionary, but as a path forward for me. A path accompanied by God towards becoming an anti-racist. This looking in the mirror feels like the right first step for me. I want to take action, but how can I know what actions to take when I'm only beginning to understand that my expressions of love, fairness, and kindness aren't going to make a dent in the systemic framework of racism? My actions need to contribute to new policies, changes in zoning laws, housing practices, education reform, election processes, banking systems. All things that produce and reproduce inequitable outcomes. In other words, I need to engage in activism. My actions need to contribute to the dissolution of political self-interest that serves to keep racism alive and well. In other words, I need to engage in the voting process. But I'm overwhelmed again. How can I do any of these things? How can one person make any difference amidst such widespread and deeply rooted policies and behaviors? And now, of course, that makes us think of Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I believe in that. So maybe I can decide to see the real work of anti-racism not as daunting and unachievable, so then I will take a pass on it because that would be easier, but instead choose to see it as the only way to begin to make a difference. I'm learning that becoming anti-racist requires intense, personal, daily work. I'm up for that. Or I guess these days I should say, I'm down for that. It sounds like it will be hard, but then there are lots of other little things that I can do as part of a daily practice of trying to become more woke. For example, rather than engaging in microaggressions, These are commonplace thoughts and actions that communicate prejudice. I can decide to engage in micro-inclusions, acts of humanity that signal to people on the margins that they are included. Several of us learned about this practice at an event on civilized discussion led by civic designer Caesar McDowell. I can applaud publicly Band-Aid's introduction after 100 years of a collection of Band-Aids that match black and brown skin tones. I can publicly support the removal of Confederate statues because I don't believe that they are benign symbols of America's past. I believe that they are symbols of white supremacy. I can personally learn about the evolving meaning and usage of the words African American, people of color, black, brown, BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and learn to use them appropriately. I can support organizations that are working to dismantle racial systems and to create opportunities for marginalized communities. We have the opportunity to learn deeply about these issues. We have the ability to decide what we want to see. We can all make our own lists of things to do. These compilations of actions are deeply personal. Each one of ours will look different, as they should, because we are different people, but all of our lists will be authentic and meaningful. We can make a difference. I'm sure I didn't say everything right in my comments today. I have so much learning to do. But I'm not really focused on saying the right thing right now. I want to learn how to do the right thing. And I'm grateful that God will be with me as I go down that path along with all of you and many others as we try to build a 21st century equitable society. Amen.